So our next panel is on tech roadmaps for profitability and growth, and will delve into high relevant topics such as how do tech-enabled ventures look at their roadmaps to simultaneously drive for profitability and growth, and what is the role of scale and role of profitability for tech-enabled ventures to design their product roadmaps. So I'd like to invite on stage our panelists and moderators. Up first, Abhimanyu Saxena, co-founder, Interview Bit and Scaler. Please put your hands together. Abhishek Podar, co-founder and CEO, Plum. And our moderator, Rudramuni B, ex-Dell R&D head, startup mentor and investor. Could we have all of our speakers and moderator up on stage? Thank you.
I know that this is not the last session. There is a one before the lunch. This is the last but one, I guess. But knowing all the action that is happening elsewhere on the streets, I'm sure there is a lot more action that can happen here also. So again, thanks to the organizers here for giving us an opportunity. I'm Rudramuni. I used to work for Dell. I was heading the R&D of Dell for more than a decade plus. Now I'm more into the investments and one of the associate partners at July Ventures.
But to some extent, education, higher education have been something which barely seen much of innovation for thousands of years. How the classroom have been probably in Nalanda is pretty much same how classroom is today, where teachers sit in a classroom and teaches a bunch of kids. While it has its impact, but probably there is an opportunity to create an exponential more impact with right integration of technology. So that is what I have been up to for close to a decade, and before that I have been coding at very, very small startups, which eventually grew very fast. So that's what the journey has been so far.
Hi, this is Abhishek here. I started my journey as a consultant with McKinsey. Very quickly figured out I have to be building things rather than consulting. So last 13, 14 years have been building products. Joined a startup here in India, moved to US, did a startup there. Built a few products at Google for some time. Eventually came back to India because that's where I thought I understand things and I have passion to build things back in India. Right now I'm building a company called Plum. Our mission really is how do we get a great healthcare and especially access to a great healthcare to everyone here in India. Right now the model that we follow is allow organizations of any size, be it a 10 people company or a 1,000 people company, to provide a really good healthcare, which includes insurance and health benefits for their employees, for their family members, for their parents. So that's the model that we have chosen with that end mission in mind, which is to provide a great healthcare access to everyone.
Thank you for the quick introduction. The topic itself is tech roadmaps for profitability and growth. Now, the technology roadmap, who doesn't need it? Whether the startup, the lot of founders or the entrepreneurs that are here, you may have created a roadmap in a systematic way or not, but at the end of it, it has to have an impact on the profitability as well as growth. Profitability, either it is going to drive the efficiency that you need, call it as an operational part or the pricing part and all that. At the end of it, it has to drive it has to result in the profits. Now, the growth part, which is a lot more to do with the quantity and the volume, call it in the context of a geographical growth or a portfolio of products or the customer segments, variety of growths that you can visualize in your own context. All of that cannot happen without the technology part. Now, there are two distinct portions need to be understood. Is the enterprise in the game of creating the technology or utilizing the technology? If you are in the process, if your business itself is to produce the technology for someone else to utilize it, then that's fine. That itself has a product roadmap and an innovation roadmap and things like that. At the same time, if you're in the game of utilizing the technology for a business model that you're going after, even then got to have the roadmap, otherwise things don't work. Now, when we peel these layers, absolutely it is going to raise a set of questions. Question can be related to, should you be adopting the latest technology or not? Should you be outsourcing or should you be doing everything in-house, or is it a balance of it? Variety of those challenges will come along, and our intent is to focus more on the second part of the second way of looking at this topic, which is how to utilize the technology, how the technology roadmap can be utilized in a context it is going to produce the profitability, and it enables the scale, it enables the growth part. So with that context, I'll let each one of you to purely based on your experience and how you have been observing, especially in the Indian startup ecosystem, how do you see it? Abhishek, please.
Yeah, I think this is an exercise that we have to do, that we do every quarter, which is putting a roadmap. One of our learning when we think of tech roadmap is we have started now splitting our roadmap into three parts. And this is especially true for the kind of business that you were talking about, which is when you're in the business of using technology to provide a service, to provide an experience. So our three parts are, number one, you have to make the customer successful, right? You can talk about experience or whatever it is, but how do you have things in your roadmap that will make your customer successful end of the day? So for example, in the context of Plum, people are buying insurance, and people have to eventually use insurance when they're at the hospital. How do you build a great technology that will, let's say, enable people to get discharged at hospital within 30 minutes instead of 4 hours, right? And you can actually use a lot of tech to do that. When people are thinking about insurance, how do you use technology to educate people on what's covered, what's not covered within the insurance? So that is the first component, which is think of how to make your customer successful. The second part of the roadmap that we do is what part of tech you build to grow your business. So that could include things like how do you educate people who are not remotely thinking about insurance in the first place, and for us in this context it is organizations that are not thinking about insurance. How do you simplify the flow of purchasing the insurance? So you can have roadmap items that are geared towards growth. And the third part, which is the profitability part, we call it sustainability, which is if you're doing one and two well, which is customer experience and growth, but if you have not figured out sustainability, then your company eventually doesn't succeed, right? Eventually you're building a company to build shareholder profit. Even if there's no shareholder, right, the company has to be self-sustaining. There is no infinite capital to any company out there in the world. So how do you, again, use technology to bring that sustainability, right? So for example, again, I'm using examples to make it very real, right? In the context of Plum, we can put thousands of people that can help out with claim, but that is not sustainable for us because we want to make the insurance product itself as affordable as possible. And if you have to put 1,000 people, then we have to jack up the price. So for us, then only tech can help us to achieve that end goal, which is affordability while being sustainable for us. So how do we then automate each part of our operation so that that 1,000 people team could actually be a 50 people team or a 10 people team or maybe a 0 people team end of the day. So that's how we think of tech roadmap, which is split it into those three components.
Very well said. good that you were able to address on the profitability part, more in the context of operational part and things like that. And at the same time, the growth got to be there. Otherwise, stakeholders are not going to be happy with that, right? So your point of view.
No, I think just to re-emphasize on what you said, for any business, the eventual goal is making profits. Because if you are not doing that, you cannot survive long enough. Now, in the journey, there might be multiple steps. So if I talk about my own journey of running the company for 10 years, for the initial 4 years, we were bootstrapped. Now, as a bootstrapped company, like every single quarter, if you are not making profits, like then you probably you would have the question that how do I pay the bill next month? Right? Now that I feel that that's a very important phase to experience for any first-time entrepreneur, because the amount of discipline that it teaches you, and frugality, for example, for most of the most powerful companies in the world, frugality have always been one of the biggest virtue. That and efficiency, like how I also see it as profit is in a way measure of efficiency of your system. If you are having to spend more capital to make less capital, that means you have a system which is fundamentally inefficient, right? So like having profit in mind is always a very important thing, but at the same time, just like everything in the world, there's no black and white. When we, for example, when we raised venture funds, so after having run company for 4 or 5 years, we did raise quite a bit of capital, almost $70–80 million. And what I also learned is that having that cushion does allow you a capability to be able to take much bigger bets. Because every quarter, every 6 months, if I'm only thinking about that, would I be making more money that I'm going to spend in next 6 months? I probably cannot have a vision that what impact we can create in 5 years, in 10 years, right? So having capital to be able to take those larger leaps of faith, because that does give you that cushion that if you take a big, bold experiment, which even if it fails, you will not have to shut down the company. So having that cushion definitely helps. Now that cushion could be built in different ways. One approach could be that you create enough profits for long enough, and hence you already have so much cushion for yourself that you can invest in R&D, invest in taking bigger leaps of faith, or of course you can raise external capital. So there is always a yin and yang, and what I feel is that for an entrepreneur who have been working in an impact space for long enough, ultimately you optimize for impact. Now your profits can fuel your impact, because through the profits you can do R&D, which can eventually lead to much more impact. Or you might realize that it's all right, let's say we have enough war chest already, we have raised enough money, and for a couple of years we can just invest more on building things which will have much bigger impact. But ultimately, of course, on a long enough horizon, all profit has to be created if we see it as a measure of value created. Because if what you are spending versus what value you are creating, that delta is what profit is.
Very well said. You start a company to make profit in an ethical way, in an integral way. But at the same time, if you're not making the money for the stakeholders, should you be starting a non-profit organization, right? So the foundation. So very well said. Again, a variety of aspects when it comes to the profitability and growth, and how the roadmap can make a difference. So I'm going to just ask a couple of questions, and then I surely want to open up for all of you to have the direct questions to anybody here. The first one is like this, more to do with the pricing part, okay? There are various challenges while arriving at the optimum price. Could be a specific product or a portfolio of products. How do you differentiate the products in the context of the values that those products and offerings have, and at the same time price positioning against the competition, against sometimes the seasonal changes, and it depends on which business model, and some of them are subjected to the seasonal part. And then surely there is a supply chain part, right? So again, a lot more in the context of electronic supply chain, and those will make a huge difference. So how can technology assist in creating the strategic approach to produce the so-called optimum pricing?
Right. That's a very interesting question, and to be honest, often I have seen that pricing is such a deep and complex science in itself, and I consider pricing to be a science rather than just a decision. And it impacts the business so much, which sometimes people also undervalue, right? Now, pricing like I'll soon come to that, how, let's say, technology and frameworks can help you achieve better pricing. But before that, there are also some very clear, psychology, like in pricing, customer psychology plays a very important role, right? And if we look at different segments of products, and there are some extreme examples of that. On one side, probably you have, one set of products, which could be, let's say, the luxury products, or even certain categories where often, to some extent, a life saving is spent once, once in a lifetime purchase kind of products. It could be, for example, education. If we talk about, for example, just IIMs, what is the right pricing for the 2-year MBA at IIM, right? They might be charging X, and then there is Stanford, which might be charging 10X. Is Stanford 10X better than IIM? I'm sure not. But people probably are more willing to pay 10X at an Stanford than willing to be paying at X and IIM. And then there might be an MBA college which no one knows of. They might find it hard to even, charge X by 10, right? Now, what is the right pricing? Similarly, there are things like the luxury items. If someone is buying Gucci, a belt, what is the right price for that? So there are two sides to it. One is purely business side. The difference between any high margin company will always end up creating much better products than a low margin company, because those margins are fundamentally what gets fueled into your R&D and creating better products, right? So if you want to create a product that your consumers love, your necessity is having a high margin product. High margin has two input variables. One is what is your price, and what is your customer of, delivering the services, or customer of, cost of delivering the services, or cost of, producing what you are selling. Generally, you will always hit a lower ceiling on what you have to spend on delivery of the services. You cannot go below that. Otherwise, it will start impacting your quality of services. And then your only lever to maximize margin is remaining to how high your price can be. Now, pricing, like on the extreme, another end of the spectrum, you have, let's say, the products like an FMCG, where, it's very hard for someone to, let's say, create a daily bathing soap which costs 10X than the regular one, but still have nominal better value, right? But creating that in a luxury product, or let's say in something like education, is very much possible. Now, coming to how do you decide that in reality, where does your product sit, and what is the right price point where it doesn't impact your overall sales so negatively that despite despite higher unit price, your total sales volume doesn't decrease so much that your net revenue is now lesser, right? Generally, what we have done, data generally plays, psychology generally translates into data in today's world, because if every single action and behavior is being recorded in data already, there is a lot of behavioral psychology that you can derive from that. So generally what we have seen is that there are a very scientific approach to doing iterations on pricing experiments, right? And seeing, validating it not just through opinions, but by actual actions of the users. One of the tools that some of the modern, and in the industry, a lot of people have been doing, which is a pretty simple way, but is pretty kind of ingenious in a way, that to check the pricing, they will just create a Facebook ad or Google ad, describe the product in that ad, put some price point that you don't know whether it is the right price or not, and your simple cost per lead and the number of leads you are able to acquire is a strong indicator whether the consumer values that price or not for the kind of product that you want to position, right? Another tricky thing with the pricing is that the experiments or decisions which are reversible in nature, they're much easier to do. You should not think too much about it. Just do that change. If it works, great. If it doesn't change, you roll it back. Sometimes pricing, however, is not a reversible change. Again, if I take example of, let's say, the fee at a management college. Let's say if IIM today decides that we should change the price to double. Instead of 20 lakhs, we should start charging 40 lakhs. That's not something they can roll back next year, right? And hence, even before, at the same time, however, while to some it might seem that why should the price increase, because it might be unaffordable to some of the students, and from impact point of view, might it create a negative impact. But at the same time, so you also have to find that balance. That, however, with additional margins, the institute might be able to invest much more on the infra, deliver much better quality of training to the students, And maybe at the same time, to ensure that it doesn't have the negative impact of that, make sure that there's right economic assistance available to the people who are coming in, right? But this is a decision which is irreversible. So then scientifically figuring out that what could be the reversible way to change things and the changes which are irreversible. How do you make sure that you already before even executing that, you prove that this decision is right across all the variables? So I think these ways, data science and kind of probabilistic modeling, etc., we have seen to play a very kind of high impact decision making process in deciding the prices.
Very well said. So, newer enterprise, would you develop a platform to simulate the so-called optimum pricing and then figure out where does it narrow it down? And obviously, that simulating model got to have variety of parameters, internal, external. Right. Or do you use one of those which are available in the market as a platform? How do you approach it?
Right. No, so for us, it has been mostly in-house. We do not use any external platform for the simulation. But at the same time, because often pricing is also something, and particularly even more in the context of startups which are building something which have never existed before. So the existing models might still be more useful for a FMCG company, for example, because a lot of consumer behavior and the product lines, very similar products, etc., have existed for so long that there could be a public model built by a consulting company, etc., which you could use. But often in the context of startups where your product is something which never existed before. So the consumer behavior about that, probably the startup itself has the maximum amount of data about that than any third-party tool that might be out there. So we had to rely on our own research and data and framework for that.
Fair. Yep.
I think I'll just add a few points to that. I think one is figure out what kind of business you are in, B2B versus B2C. I think a lot of what you mentioned is where you can do a lot of data modeling, use a lot of experimentation is applicable on B2C. On B2B, you are so close to the customers that you should be talking to your customers every day. You should be experimenting. Every conversation, you should throw a new price to figure out, hey, what is the right price that customer is ready to pay. The great thing about B2B is you don't need to have a fixed price in some ways, right? You can essentially maximize the value that you get based on the value that person is giving to your product. So let's say I've built a product, I can charge 100 rupees to you because you value it more and 50 rupees to you because you value it less. If my cost of operation is 30 rupees, I'm still making profit from both of you. So that's the beauty of B2B, which is be very, very open to doing price discoveries. So that's one thing. The second part which you are mentioning, which is, let's say you're in B2C, figure out what kind of product you are in or what kind of market you are in. If you are completely building a new product, then you have to do a lot of price discovery, run all the experiments. If you're building a company where it's an existing market, let's say I'm building a marketplace, a better marketplace, I'm selling clothes or groceries, right? There you don't have to do price discovery, right? There you can actually use a lot of technology. For example, some of the best companies like Amazon, Flipkart as well, I think, they will just scrape prices in real time of all the platforms that are out there. So if, let's say, a simple soap, for example, is getting sold at 40 rupees on some platform and that price got changed to 39 rupees at midnight, you can actually build scrapers that can give you that price update from 40 to 39 and update it on your website, right? So also think about what kind of market you are in, and you can actually use a lot of technology if you're playing in a highly competitive market.
Good differentiation on the B2B and B2C part, and surely well articulated. Thank you. I'm going to just ask one more question and then open it for you and for all of you to have some questions. So I'm going to put the question in a little bit different way. While designing this roadmap, are there some top 2 or 3 that we should not do based on your experience? While designing a roadmap, don't do these mistakes. Are there such things?
I can take 2 bullet points quickly.
Sure.
Probably there might be some from you. One is that never try to build things that you are not expert in. One of the mistakes that a lot of startups do, that, you know, if I need to build this tool, because we are a bunch of coders, so we'll just go and build it. Generally that ends up costing you much more than what purchasing it outside would cost you. Decision making often gets very broken there, because we feel that if I'm building it I'm not spending anything, but in reality you are spending a lot more than, you know, what you will pay a vendor. So always buy, of course, in a frugal way, rather than building things which already exist in the market. And this is, of course, gets even more applicable when it comes to tech platforms. The other one is that probably on the do's side, that like whatever your core is, you always have to know that what is your core. And that is something where you have to create a differentiator. So do not try to outsource that. This is a mistake that many of Indian companies, even in the manufacturing space, etc., have always ended up making, that if, let's say, if you are a alternative energy company, you must own the technology of wind turbines. You cannot outsource that. So make sure that you have deep R&D development for your core, and at the same time, you are not trying to build things which are just available out there as a tool. So buy them rather than trying to build them.
Very well said. Very good 2 points. How about you?
I'll add, especially to the second point, which is, let's say you're a core tech company. One of the mistakes that I've seen happening, especially in the early stage, is we over-architect things. We'll try to get the best engineer in the room and say, hey, this is what we are building. Let's say you're building an insurance company, right? And it has to be tech-enabled. That architect will start thinking of scale that doesn't exist. Hey, we will have our aspiration is we'll have 10 million people that are insured. That architect will think of 10 million people as on day zero, and will want to spend 1 year architecting that system, designing that system, building that system. In that 1 year, your company will die, right? So I think one of the don'ts would be don't over-engineer, don't over-architect when you are starting up, but be very mindful as your company starts scaling up. Be very mindful of all the mistakes or mistakes is the wrong word, all the compromises that you have done when you started building your early product, your early tech. You would have to do a lot of compromises, and that typically results in what we call as tech debt. You will start accumulating those tech debt, and you have to keep paying off those tech debts, right? Which is, let's say you have chosen a certain platform which you know that it won't scale beyond a certain number of users. You can say, hey, I can pay that, I can maybe switch that tech layer a year from now, but if you wait for more than a year, then you will have more tech debt, and it will become more and more harder for you to replace that tech debt. So be very, very mindful of when you're very scrappy, when you're hustling in the early days, and that's the right thing to do. Be very mindful as you start scaling.
Thank you. Again, over-engineering is always especially the founding members are the engineers, it becomes more obviously, right? So I'll just have a maximum 2 questions, and where are the mics? One short question or the short answer. All right. Hello. Yeah, go ahead.
Abhishek, you mentioned about the over-engineering. So, in your thinking, how many iterations one product will need in order to be the robust, right from the early stage?
If I understand your question, you're asking how many iterations would a product require? There's no right number. I think that is the true concept of building MVP, which we call as minimal viable product, right? Which is you build as small a product in as quick a time possible, so that your customer can start using it, and they can start finding value, and it may happen in your first iteration, or it may require 100 iterations of it, and that's the whole reason that you want to keep it so short, so that you have a lot of time to do those 100 iterations. You'll be very lucky if that happens in 1 iteration, and it can happen, but there's no right number.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So we are surely beyond the time. And thank you again for wonderful insights into how you do things, starting from whether it's over-engineering or don't do the over-engineering, and the B2B, B2C, and pricing part. Thank you very much. All right, enjoy the rest of the session.